If you grew up renting games, you remember the pressure. It's Friday night. You can only pick one game. You get it for 2 days, no saves, no walkthroughs. And so many of those games felt harder than they needed to be. Back then, it felt like difficulty was just part of that era. But what if it wasn't random? And what if it wasn't just design philosophy? What if it was about protecting a $60 purchase? In the early 90s, Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games weren't cheap. Retail ads regularly show $59.99 and $69.99 for major releases, and sometimes even higher. Adjusted for inflation, that's well over $100 today. That is not impulse money. That's mow the lawn for 3 weeks money. Now compare that to renting. For a few dollars, you could take that same game home for the weekend. If you could beat it in 2 days, you didn't need to buy it. And that was a problem, because rentals weren't niche, especially in North America. Chains like Blockbuster Video scaled nationally by the late 80s and early 90s. By 1990, Blockbuster was generating roughly $1.5 billion in revenue, with estimates suggesting around 10% tied to Nintendo game rentals alone. That's not pocket change, that's market pressure. Nintendo even went after Blockbuster in 1989, not to ban rentals outright because legally they couldn't, but over things like photocopying instruction manuals. Nintendo was trying to defend value wherever they could. This wasn't fringe behavior, it was the ecosystem. And whether every developer consciously designed around rentals or not, the incentive environment was real. When finishing a game in one weekend meant avoiding a $60 purchase, difficulty wasn't just aesthetic, it was protective. Now imagine you're a developer watching that happen. You've built a game that costs real money to manufacture. Cartridges weren't cheap. ROM chips were one of the most expensive components. Bigger games meant higher production costs per unit. And every unsold cartridge was physical inventory sitting in a warehouse. Meanwhile, a single rental copy could circulate dozens of times without generating another retail sale. How do you protect your game from being finished in a single weekend? You design for longevity. Limited continues, no mid-level saves, restarting from the beginning after every game over. Now, not every developer sat in a room and said, "How do we beat Blockbuster?" But in a North American cartridge market where value was measured in hours, the game that lasted longer looked safer and smarter. If you ran out of lives in something like Battletoads, you weren't just frustrated, you were burning time, real rental window time. And in many cases, games escalated sharply at specific points. Think about something like The Lion King on the Super Nintendo. That infamous giraffe level. It didn't feel like a gentle skill ramp. It felt like a wall. As a kid, it was unfair. From a design standpoint, though, it extended playtime. It made completion unlikely in a single rental window. That giraffe wasn't just a giraffe. In a $60 cartridge economy, that wall was insurance. Even password systems play differently when you look at them through this lens. Writing down a 12-character code on a scrap of paper is not the same as quick saving and retrying instantly. It slows you down. It makes progress fragile. Write one character wrong? Back to the beginning. How many times did you mistake the letter O for the number 0? Difficulty wasn't punishment. It was pacing. And pacing in that era protected perceived value. And notice a term that kept showing up in reviews at the time: replay value. Magazines didn't just ask if a game was good, they asked if it would last. Another phrase, worth a rental, appeared regularly in review sections, a quiet signal that length and challenge influenced purchasing decisions. A short, easy game risked being labeled disposable, and in that era, that label could hurt. And that pressure didn't just shape the industry, it shaped us. You didn't just play these games, you studied them, you memorized enemy patterns, you learned optimal routes, you replayed early levels over and over. The first level, mastered. The last level, in many cases, still a mystery. Difficulty created mastery culture. School playground conversations weren't about who finished a game casually, they were about who could beat it at all. Not because developers wanted to punish you, but because in a cartridge economy, games that lasted longer were safer bets. And that meant difficulty wasn't optional. It was expected. Now, the obvious counterpoint is this. Arcade games were hard long before rentals. And that's true. Arcade difficulty was quarter-driven. The machine wanted another coin. Failure was revenue, and it wasn't subtle about it. Home consoles inherited that DNA, but once the quarter disappeared, the mechanism changed. In arcades, death created income. In the cartridge era, difficulty protected income. A different economic model, different incentive, same surface result. Hard games, but for a different reason. Retro games, especially in the North American cartridge era, weren't built in a comfort economy. They were built in a purchasing economy. So there were no patches, no updates, no post-launch fixes. Every mechanic had to justify $60. Every cartridge had to feel substantial. Difficulty wasn't the only tool available, but it was one of the cleanest. And while not every hard game succeeded, and not every easy game failed, the market consistently rewarded experiences that felt long, challenging, and substantial. That incentive doesn't explain everything, but it explains more than we usually admit. Then the economics changed. As games moved from cartridges to CDs, manufacturing costs per unit dropped dramatically. Pressing a disc was cheaper than producing a ROM cartridge. Inventory risk decreased. And storage exploded. Full motion video, voice acting, cinematics. That didn't eliminate difficulty overnight. Early PlayStation games could still be tough, but the financial penalty for shorter experience was reduced. Memory cards became standard. Saving became easier. Games grew longer through content, not just resistance. The design incentives shifted. Instead of protecting against quick completion, games began focusing on engagement pacing, unlockables, collectibles, post-game content. In the 90s, games were defending against your weekend. Today, they're defending against your attention span, which, if we're honest, is not what it used to be. Back then, the game didn't want you to finish too fast. Now, it doesn't want you to leave. And maybe that's part of why those victories felt so powerful. When you finally beat a game back then, it didn't feel casual. It felt earned. Because it was. You didn't breeze through it in an evening. You wrestled with it. You memorized it. You pushed through it. The difficulty wasn't always fair, but it was friction with a purpose. So when you go back to a classic from the 80s or 90s and it suddenly feels brutal, it's not just nostalgia. It's structure, it's economics. It's a game built in a different incentive system. A different era, different pressures. Same game, different rules. So now I'm curious, what game could you never beat no matter how many times you rented it? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and happy gaming, my friends.